Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Bulletproof Dental Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Boulden, and with me, the always handsome Dr. Craig Spodak. We have a return guest today, fired up because of all the downloads we've received from him. He's a popular guy. Jake, you're a popular guy out there. You must have a lot of influence. But anyway, we've got Jake back from the DEO, the Dentist Entrepreneur Organization. And we're going to talk about the future. And we're going to talk about the future of group dentistry. We're going to talk about some trends that Jake's seeing. We're going to talk about some of the risks of expansion, maybe how a mastermind can help. And just, we're going to talk in your lane, Jake, about the things that are going on. Also, to bring awareness to the summit. I guess are you calling it a summit?
Yeah.
Summit. Yep. Summit in June in Phoenix. And the dates are exactly, Jake, help me out here, pal.
June 27th through 29th.
27th to 29th. Be awesome. And give some highlights on that real quick. So we've got, I think you just said Kois was coming?
Yeah, so we're going to touch on kind of it's funny because we talk about the future, but I looked at the presentations at a high level the other day, and actually every single one of them is happening now. So future truly is here now. But we look at this year, we're going to look at the Dr. Kois is going to present an encore presentation. He came on stage 2 years ago and talked about his software Evidentia and evidence-based dentistry. And he is incredible in front of it. I mean, a lot of folks have been there to the center, but his view on group dentistry and what's coming down the pipeline. I'll give you the rundown as kind of a shameless plug, I guess. But you are speaking there, Dr. Boulden, so excited for that. On blockchain and dentistry.
We tell a funny story on that. So I'm sitting in the back of the room for Richard Evangelista's course. Well, I don't know if it was a course or what is the name of that he does?
Dental Force. I'd say it's a course, 2 day
Okay.
course.
All right. So Dental Force, went out to California. So I'm sitting in the back of the room talking to some new friends that I just made, marketing guys actually. And the topic of like blockchain and Bitcoin came up. And of course, I just opened my mouth and started talking, and people are like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why do you know so much about this? And, I think, Jake, you were walking by at the time. You're like, dude, you gotta like tell people about this stuff in the future in the context of dentistry. So, and I may or may not be right, but anyway, so you invited me to come speak to your group, and I'm fired up.
Yeah.
And now Craig is my plus one. So if anyone's listening and you want to come hang out with me and Craig, we are going to be hanging out in Phoenix, June 27th, 28th, and 29th.
Yeah, just that's enough for
that time of year.
Yeah, it's worth the price of admission just right there.
I mean, heck yeah, it is.
Which I found out, Dr. Bull, since then that you're one of, you got to be the only certified blockchain.
Lunatic.
Blockchain certification and dentist together in combination.
Yeah, I don't know why. Craig, did you know that I got certified in blockchain technology? Yeah. So you may be right. I may be the only person who felt the value in doing that for some reason. But anyway.
Well, you also accept Bitcoin at your practice.
This is true. I had someone try and pay with it, but then they changed their mind because. But anyway, and that was more of a marketing ploy, though, Craig. But thank you for doing that.
Well, it depends on when they wanted to pay you. It could have been really good if they wanted to pay
That's
you.
True.
That one crown could be.
They tried to pay me last Christmas. It would have been horrible.
Exactly.
2 Christmases ago. Would have really been bad for me.
Yeah.
But all right, buddy. Well, let's jump into some of it. So, Craig and I talk about groups a lot. We talk about it not so much in the context of like that's our specialty. But we talk about it in terms of we know that's the future of dentistry. We talk about dentistry being a super fragmented industry, meaning that there's a lack of consolidation, and therefore there's a lot of runway for groups to consolidate in dentistry, probably more so than anything else. Craig, didn't we figure out that it was better than dermatology? When I say better, I mean there's more opportunity.
Yeah, as far as runway, when you talk about consolidation, most of the other healthcare fields, optometry, dermatology, veterinary, they're mostly consolidated. Mm-hmm. So dentistry is arguably, I know statistics are always varying, but always hearing around 15 or 12 to 18%. Would you say that's about fair, Jake, to say about our consolidation?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to define it, but that's the 15 to 18 and 20 is what typically we hear.
Yeah, because
So these most not consolidated, and for the sake of the listener, that means that you're working independently and not working for a DSO or a corporation.
Right. That's what I was going to qualify. Maybe that 11% was a DSO number. And then there's group practices, which obviously, Jake, you have plenty of group practices that I guess technically, I guess they would be a DSO. Maybe they are, but you kind of, you guys are geared towards helping the group practice grow, or anyone who's interested in growing to a group practice or scaling to multiple locations.
Yeah, absolutely. We're thinking about that second location. A lot of times we can help them get that jump start into that second location up until, 8, 10, 12 locations as well. That's where our group kind of focuses. Yeah.
So, we talk about trends and kind of like, and what's emerging in the group in the space right now. And you're obviously, you have your ear to the ground more than we do in terms of kind of the people that you talk to and the masterminds that you're involved with. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I'm constantly thinking about this. So there's kind of two areas. There's groups that are growing past 5 or 6 locations because they're kind of their own animal. And it's really interesting because the word DSO, like calling the whole industry DSO industry, in my mind isn't always accurate, right? Because you have 5 locations that are just a group that work together, but you don't have a formal, all owned by dentists. You don't have a formal DSO legally structured. Yeah. But those are all called DSOs. So it's just a little bit weird with the vernacular. But those folks, what we're seeing a lot of folks do is they're growing up to the point where they have a large choice to make, which is should they centralize all of their services and make that gigantic investment, or strategically partner with a larger DSO that already has all of that. And, some of these groups are running really, detailed financials and making the call that, it might be worth just teaming up with somebody who already has those things.
Can I pause you right there? Because
Yeah.
This is great. So what have you seen in terms of the groups that go to start centralizing? Is there a pecking order of what you see doing first, meaning the lowest hanging fruit of, let's say it's an insurance centralization, or I see call center being like the last thing that you would want to centralize.
Yeah, I think that's a popular idea, Pete, that the call center is this because there's two ways. That's
why I'm bringing it up. Yeah.
There's value proposition and then there's valuation. And I think they're two very distinct topics. I think that many people are shaping their DSOs as in what does the PE group want to see us do? And we all can talk about how PE, whether or not it's good for dentistry, bad for dentistry. And that's a tangential conversation I don't think we're ready to have. But I do believe a lot of the heads of DSOs are saying, what does the PE want us to do? PE wants us to have a centralized call center. PE wants us to have that. And I don't necessarily know if it's always best for the practice or for the patient. So let's go down that path if you don't mind.
Well, okay, there's a few things with that. Now, if you're talking PE, like coming in and partnering up with the dentist directly, then they would build out all these services themselves. But if you are more and more, these groups are teaming up with strategic DSOs, already built DSOs who already have the call center, who just plug their call center into your 6 location DSO. So in that case, a lot of people may think that's wasted money, right? You build out this huge call center, it's costs, your profit's down, and you get paid on multiple profit, and all of a sudden they just get rid of it anyway, or they just plug their own better one in anyway. So so you have that to consider. The other thing that I like to think about with this is just execution. So I think about, okay, you're at this spot where you're starting to think about centralizing. And it's call center, for example. And I have sat with folks who have centralized their calls, and I have heard them say, centralizing was the greatest thing I've ever done. I would have done it way earlier. In fact, Dr. Evangelista says that. I have had people say who have waited to their 15th location, and it's the very last thing that they centralized, and they're so glad that they waited for that. Right. So it goes all across the board. I've seen people centralize their call center and then decide that calls are actually better to be answered in the office. Yeah. Yeah. So it's all over the board. So I think to myself, okay, where do we go since everyone's doing it differently and seem to be working? And to me, it comes down to decision making, like strategic decision making. Like, how do you make the decision? To me, it's more important to know how to make a decision rather than what the decision is. And to me, it's about, there's two ways to look at the decision. One, is there a cost savings opportunity there? So so am I able to make more money by doing it? Does it make things better? Or do I have a huge problem that needs to be fixed? So it's either like fixing a problem or chasing opportunity. If that makes sense.
Okay.
So I would look at those and I would measure those and like, okay, what is, and also another thing I like to think about is like, there's the nuts and the bolts, which is like the running the financials of it.
But how do you measure that if you don't have the context in which to measure, right? Like you can't just say, let's just try this and then compare and contrast, like which one worked better for us.
Well, you can. So that's
an expensive experiment. I think most of us would just rather be like, hey, like you were successful. Here's your roadmap.
Yeah.
Kind of emulate that, right? I'm not going to recreate the real. Like, just show me the path to efficiency, profitability, and scalability, and let me exit if that's what I'm trying to do. And so I guess what I'm trying to get out of you is, yes, I know there's a key for everybody, right? Like there's probably a formula that works and it's gonna be different than doctor down the street. But like, if you had a magic wand in your hand, Jay, what would be your path that you've seen being like, yeah, those guys nailed it and those guys nailed it and the commonalities of the centralization pathway?
Yeah. Okay, I will go down that road, but I will say, this.
You have to be Switzerland on that. You can be non-biased.
Well, this is like if I were to scream at the mountaintops to the industry in general. It's like I just want everyone to kind of. I firmly believe it's about how you make the decisions, because they truly are different, and making quality decisions rather than like the blueprint of it, because it truly is different. But I'll give you an example. Two principles. One is, to test it out is actually a great execution principle. Like if you got something big, a big risk you're taking or something, it is way better to test it out in a little spot and see how it goes, right? Secondly is you can run real financials. You can say, okay, I got these people. If I would reduce my call volume, and then I not only don't need to hire as many front desk people, and that saves you here, and here's what I'd make up my investment in a year and a half, and I'd get them. I mean, there's financial people out there that will run.
Okay, like a Monte Carlo scenario,
Yeah, there's people that you pay to do that, and they pop off the number, and you're like, thanks, they just saved me $150,000. Those would be like fractional CFOs and things like that. Okay. So if I were running a DSO, I would test it first. I would test it on location, see kind of how it goes. But I would, for sure, like the principle behind centralizing is sound. Right, you take all the minutia out of the location, you bring it in one spot. You now have
economies of scale. Look, I get that. I just think that, like, I guess where I'm trying to lean into you a little bit on this, Jay, because that Craig and I see like it's just this blanket like centralization and the disregard for any culture or whatever you've done, and it's not a one-size-fits-all centralization.
Well, DSOs, just to your point, Jake, I was happy you said it. You said people talk about DSOs as a one-size-fits-all thing. You had said that just a moment ago. Like we tend to cut and paint in broad brushstrokes when we're talking about this segment, corporate dentistry. Like we're all corporate. We all have some S Corp or LLC, even if just one doctor in one chair, there's a corporation behind it. So I think and up to this point, I do believe, Pete and I always talk about DSO 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, that type of dialogue is common in our podcast. And I do believe up to this point, there is not as much variation in the DSO space as there will be. So when you look at most DSOs, I think that many of them, like any other mass produced model, you have to roll out a platform that's reproducible. So whether or not you're rolling out a Ritz-Carlton platform or a Chick-fil-A platform, there needs to be a platform. But the dialogue does not go into the nuances of the different types of dental business models that are out there, because they're varied. There are Ritz-Carlton dentists and there are Chick-fil-A dentists. And I'm not making a value or judgment call on the Chick-fil-A guy or the Ritz guy, because who cares? I mean, it could suit your needs. Whatever your vision of their practice is what's going to be best for you and your patients. But when you talk about a call center, as an example of a platform that a DSO is typically going to roll out, it can work really nicely if there's doc in a box type of DSO and there's a lower culture to that particular office, or it could really backfire if you have a really high culture, high touch, high feel when you're speaking to Tim in Thailand and you're like, where's Jenny? And they don't know who Jenny is. So I just think that the conversation needs to go down to another level, that there's DSO 1.0 or 2.0, what we have now, but I do believe there's a more You know, was it what was that video that you sent me, Pete? Was it from the DEO about that guy talking DSO 2.0? Do you remember that video that we watched together?
Yes. I don't remember. Actually.
So there was some video talking about, it was funny because we're always talking about DSO 2.0, but they talk about this idea of a larger role of culture within the dental office, because I think most of us that can agree the average, you know, smaller practice might have more touch and feel or perhaps culture than some of the larger platforms. So call centers may or may not work as well depending on the actual dental business that you're running into.
That's exactly right. Right. I mean, you have to look at where you're going strategically. What is your model? Are you volume and less high touch? Then centralizing makes tons of sense, right?
Yeah.
If you're high touch and you're going to have some calls botched and it's going to really hurt long-term high-paying patients, maybe not do that, right? So it's almost like top-down versus bottom-up. Like top-down is like, okay, all the large DSOs tell us what works, and then bottom-up, it's like, okay, how do we build businesses? Great businesses, and how do we be great entrepreneurs? Like that's and there is if you look from 2 locations to 10 locations, 12 locations, those kind of groups, there's tons of variation. That's why I can't nail one way, because I see it done so many ways. There's just no way.
Yeah, I think that's really fair, and also smart to not talk into that space, because it's like if you go to a restaurant convention. There's not restaurant conventions where you're sitting next door to, there's a guy from Morton sitting right next to a guy from Popeye's Chicken and McDonald's. I think it's just interesting that in dentistry we talk about it as one model.
And think about the patient. Think about the diversity in patients. I mean, there are patients who need lower cost, higher volume. That's all they can afford, and they're totally happy with it. There's so many different sections of patients, and then your business is serving that type of patient.
And also that same patient wants different things for different types of services. So a high-end, really high-touch patient may pop into the local Walmart that has a CEREC machine in the future. If there's a dental unit in a dental store in a Walmart, that could say, you know what, I haven't been able to make it into my normal dentist, and it's 9 p.m. on a Friday and this tooth is broken. I'm going to go to the pop-up Walmart thing, or it's just, there's different patients at different times will act differently.
That's exactly right.
And I think it's fair to say that it's not like we're going after certain patients. It's just we're going after certain services. And so sometimes convenience and access are more important than high touch and high cost and luxury feel. We all stay in nice hotels, but sometimes we want to stay in a Hyatt place. Sometimes, it just depends on what you want.
I've never desired to, you know what? I'm going to slum it this time.
Well, listen, if you
can afford it, I mean.
I'm kidding. Greg's like, that just bust.
No, I just think that we
the whole podcast can't go past without me busting on him. I felt like that was my opportunity.
And I also feel that doctors are in a frenetic search to find out what is the best dental business model, without regard of what they want from a personal fulfillment or economic fulfillment. They just say, what is the best thing? So I'll ask a guy like you, Jake, or I'll ask Pete or me, like, what's the best thing I should do? I'm like, well, it just depends on,
right.
I've talked to guys
narrative sometimes, right? Like
they said, I want to do what you and Pete do.
Vision.
Yeah. I love that you're touching on that, because, so that's like I look at everything from a business kind of aspect, and not like, making money business, but business principles. And so when you're doing that, you're looking at, you're making your own decisions based off your competition at the outside, right? You're like outside factors, like externally validating what you're doing. And there's a whole other way to look at it, which is from the inside, which is just build a great business, build an incredible business that retains your employees, that has awesome, reviews and scores for patients, and you will be fine. You will always be fine. It's just, you make different decisions when you're it's actually coming from a place of fear when you're looking at the outside.
Scarcity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I'm just out there saying, hey, just build great businesses, guys. And you will add locations, and you'll build groups, and you'll be great, and you will have, it'll be hard, but you'll be fine at the end.
I love that distinction, outside versus inside. It's exactly what I was trying to say. It's beautiful. It's perfect.
Yeah. So just focus on, doing epic shit, and like within your own thing, and everything else will handle itself, regardless of the competition that we have this pervasive fear in dentistry of like, oh my gosh, groups are everywhere and they're popping up and I'm going to be out of business. Like, that's not the case.
It's not. And I will add to, now I'm not going to, so this is a natural human thing to go through as an entrepreneur. This is why I think entrepreneurship is just very, very difficult. because, you know, you have those sleepless nights, you know, and it's like, wow, what am I going to do with all this? And so that's, of course, when I talk to my wife and you know, just vent and crying myself to sleep with her. And because I worry about stuff too, like we all do.
Right.
And she tells me, and this is what I lean on myself personally, is there's a saying, I think I didn't count before, somebody says, which is, be so good they can't ignore you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I start to focus externally, I just bring it back and say, okay, I just got to be, I got to be so good in all of the rest of it. And then I forget about the external stuff.
Yeah, I'm letting that soak in because I think it's that's a lot of pressure, man, to even tell yourself like just be so good, like, you know, because that's a strategy, and it's hard to implement the tactics that make that a reality, you know.
It is. It can be more empowering though, because you wake up tomorrow like, okay, cool. Like, how do we make a better patient experience?
Right.
I can do that. You know, I don't have to figure out like, you know, $500,000 centralization.
Yeah,
But you know, it's like Tony Robbins says, and Craig's brought this up on several, like, really there's only two aspects to business. And, you know, we are in the business of teeth, you know, so at the end of the day, and if you're constantly thinking about innovation, and that doesn't mean like your product innovation, it can mean like, are you obsessed with your customer service and your customer experience and
Your
team and how they answer the phone, like down to the nitty gritty. Like you can't help, but if you know, if those things become obsessed and you are constantly innovating and auditing the way you're doing, you're going to win. You just will, right? Because that awareness creates just opportunities out the yin yang, I think.
And I just want to touch on one thing as well, guys. There's a lot of conversation as dentist, as entrepreneur, dentist, as CEO. And I think that's a really cool narrative for some of us, but it's not one size fits all as well. I've had so many conversations where people are like, you know, you've got a business and you make money when you're not there, and that type of dialogue. And I'm like, well, tell me a little bit about yours. Like share your numbers, you know, with me. It's like, well, I see patients 3 days a week and I make $550. I'm like, dude, you got a job, but you got a job like LeBron has a job. You know, LeBron does not own a business. LeBron has to show up on the court, but he gets paid really well for each hour he's on the court. And there's nothing wrong. I don't think you have to be fearful at all if you're just a single doc or just a doc that has a practice.
That's an outlier, Craig. I mean, that's an outlier. Like,
right, but they need to have their path too. So if you're that guy that maybe not 500 on 3 days a week, he's an outlier because he's a super GP and he's invested in himself. But if you are a solo doc feeling like, what the hell do I do? Do I become an entrepreneur? Entrepreneurship is not for everyone. And that struggle porn that Gary Vee is pumping out, you know, like, oh, the hustle never stops, and shows him. I mean, I love Gary Vee, you know, I do. And we probably all take a lot from him, but there is this like, you know, this idea of the struggle and how glorious the struggle is. And I just believe there is space and room in our model to just be a dentist if you so choose. And you can actually win at just being a dentist because you can out customer serve any competition, anyone. I mean, if you just call all your new patients the day before you see them to confirm, like, hey, it's Dr. Jones, I'm excited about meeting you tomorrow. And hey, this is Dr. Jones, I hope you're feeling good. You've already outserved almost all of us that are talking right now. So I just think that there's space, you know, obviously there's a listener that's trying to work the angle and become an entrepreneur and do what Jake, Pete, and I are doing. But there's also room for the other guy, you know, even within an organization like the DEO or our podcast, to learn to say, just be the best that you could be. And you don't have to take over the world. You'll learn, if you learn what the DSOs are doing, you can actually beat them at their own ground game if you don't do it. So I just think it's good to open up to everybody that's on this, that there's nothing wrong with just being a dentist, just being a dentist. You know,
I've seen this. I mean, I've seen it many times. You know, you really have to just check yourself and say, you know, do I really? Because if you make that step from going from a doctor to CEO, you will take a pay cut and your stress will go way up. And say goodbye to ever like a dinner with your family where you don't have part of your brain thinking about some problems and issues.
That is the truth.
It's so important that you're saying this, Jay. Keep going. Sorry.
Well, yeah, no. So I mean, we've had people come in the DEO, and then after a year, they're like, you know what? Awesome. I'm glad I know now, but not for me. I've got a great life, got a great family. And what's the point of all this anyway? You know, it's to have a great life and a great family. Like that's why you build a business and challenge yourself. So yeah, but they have to. Sometimes people have to go out and venture in. You know, like a 18-year-old becoming a man or a woman. You got to venture in the world and get the cuts and bruises and see what it's like.
Yeah, it's such a valid point. And if you have that burning curiosity in you of what it's going to be like,
You're
sometimes you
making
have
me
to go.
question everything right now, Jake, in my life.
I mean,
Welcome to
I
work
think,
every day.
and I think it's a Western disease. It's a disease in America more often than other parts of the world. I know we have a global listenership, but I think in many parts of Europe, there's not the access to capital. Like any dentist can borrow millions of dollars, no problem. Anyone listening has a DDS or DMD can go to any bank right now and borrow millions of dollars, which is kind of cool, but it's also pretty scary because we can get ourselves in hot water pretty easily. They're not worried about us because we can just work harder and pay it all off. So I think in Europe and other places that the access to capital is not the same. So the hunger for growth is not left unchecked.
Yeah.
So in Europe, even in Australia, perhaps it might be.
Well, I can tell you so I was telling you guys, my wife is Australian. I spent some time in Australia, and they think we're lunatics over here in the U.S. for our the achievement culture. They're like, why? It's about the saying they say over there. It's about living a good life. That's all it's about. And they just don't understand why we're like getting up way early and staying way late, and like why? But then again, they have beaches 100 yards from their homes, and so I'm like, oh, you already got. Like, we're trying to get to that. You guys already have that.
Right. So Jake, let's pivot because I want to cover up on some more things, and I want to talk about the value of the mastermind that you guys have, and I think that masterminds are important no matter where you are in your life cycle of a dentist. I think you need people to bounce off of. That's actually how Craig and I kind of got to talking is I wanted someone to just authentically talk with, and someone who wanted to me to succeed and be able to share and give ideas and vice versa. So how big of an impact is that on your members?
Yeah, I mean, so I think so. We're talking about growth, and everything that we do is revolved around growth. Typically, when it comes about wants to grow in some way, and so the way I look at it is you need to grow in that next stage. You literally need to become a different person. And you can think about, I would imagine as a dentist when you first started versus who you are now professionally, it's like you're just a whole different person. You think differently, you react differently, your hands move differently, and so you need to be that like next version of yourself. So that in the development world, that's called like transformation. You need to transform butterfly, caterpillar butterfly. So how do you transform? There's many ways to do that. You can do coaching, you can do like therapy. You can do usually education where you just kind of sit and listen isn't always the best way for transformation. It's just information. And to me, all those things work. But to me, the way I've experienced the most transformation is by putting myself around amazing people. And I start to think differently, level up, and just see the world differently. And I've just had a lot of the good things that have come to me from that. And so I just believe with every ounce of me that putting yourself in these environments is crucial. And that's what we do. We try to put amazing people together. We take them through curriculums and subjects and all the stuff they need to know about adding locations and growing a DSO and all of that. But we do it with the lens of masterminding. And that the other thing that I touched on is there's no right way to do it. So there's a lot of educational programs out there that say, hey, here's how we did it. Here's how you should do it. Here's how you should compensate your associates. Here's how you should centralize your call center. But I just don't believe there's one way to do it. And so
I think the masterminds, the reason I bring this up, I think they're the most powerful and efficient learning there is.
Exactly. Because one-on-one learning, in a forum where everybody feels safe to communicate.
It's a tribe. It's a band of brothers and sisters. It's people it's not this zero-sum game where people, dentists have a real problem with well, if you succeed, that means I have to do worse. And especially locally that, sometimes that happens locally. They're kind of not really wanting success. Sometimes you see, right? It's kind of like the crab pot they talk about, but masterminds are great because, people they're abundantly thinking for you. There's not this competitive nature, and there's just genuine, you literally just trying to present value, right? And you're trying to do the same thing back. And so in my experience as a clinician and a business owner, that's been my most powerful, has been smaller groups, let's say 10 to 20 to 30 people that you can authentically share with, and they lean into kind of helping you problem solve or strategize or develop tactics.
Yeah, I've done a lot of analyzing the psyche of the dentist, try to figure out how I can help everyone the most. And I've noticed that it's twofold. One, there's a positive and a negative to the psyche. One is a lot of times looking for the blueprint and the answer, and I think that must come from dental school and just the nature of dentistry, right? I mean,
it's very process oriented dentistry. It's very stepwise process. It's a
yeah,
recipe.
yeah,
Dentistry
and
is a
like
recipe.
the beginning, middle, and end, and being able to just
It's like flying a plane. Like there's a checklist, and we know that there's that. So we
yeah,
become engineers following checklists as opposed to
yeah.
like, hey, let me just like look in this direction. Yeah. Okay.
Right,
Sorry.
right. So that's one. But equally amazing is that generally the ones that we come across are that typically we attract growth-minded folks who are abundant mindset, and they're just so willing to help. I mean, if you go to our conferences, people on stage they're just sharing and sharing, and I'm always wondering like what's in it for them. And again, am I having coffee staring at the clouds kind of thing? I'm like, I just think dentistry attracts givers and people want to give back, and I think that lends itself to an industry that just has a lot of people trying to help each other, all, really kind of unselfishly, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's what's kept us away from the managed care, and what's happened in medicine is that we do have a lot of entrepreneurial thinkers that want to give back. I mean, the most iconic lecturers in dentistry are extreme givers. It's incredible.
Yeah,
So,
it's amazing.
yeah.
So it's great, and as a business coming from the business side, I do feel honored to be in that environment. Sometimes during our conferences, I can't believe it. I can't believe how much people are out there helping each other. It's incredible.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that in most most traditional lecture formats without the mastermind, oftentimes, at least historically, the person speaking was not a dentist. And I think that's in the psychology of many dentists, it's changed a lot that people want to hear from dentists that are actually doing it. And now with social media and Google reviews and everybody can see each other's offices. I remember like listening to social media conversations 5 and 7 years ago and look at the dentist on my own Instagram and be like, or his Facebook page, he had no followers, no likes. I'm like, how am I listening to this guy that has this? Or how do you talk to a guy about iconic office culture, iconic practice when he has a 2.2 on Yelp? So there is a meritocracy of the, and a democratization of the information. So you can't hide behind a website anymore. If you actually don't have the chops to be talking about what you're doing, you're going to get less credible. There's eyes on screens as you're talking. Like, who is this guy? Is he the real deal? So there's been a weeding out of that, which is actually a good thing. And now with podcasts like this and all the stuff that people are doing, information is free now. So historically, you might have had to pay a lot of money for this conversation for the three of us. You might have to fly somewhere. Now we're just getting it all pro bono. So it's a great time to be a dentist and have that access to that information in many different platforms.
Totally agree.
Well, buddy, you want to talk about anything else? I like what we've covered.
I have one question for him, if you don't mind.
Please.
I want to talk about, Jake, what are the risks associated with group dentistry and DSO expansion? I just want to know what your belief is. Like, what's the blind side that no one's thinking about?
Well, again, I'll speak from two angles. I mean, you're not talking about the risk of somebody going from a solo location to a group. You're talking about just the overall. From folks in your audience, I mean, not a risk, but one thing to consider is there's this thing with multiples and people getting big cash outs, right? And if you look at other industries, like the multiples that are thrown around now are like 7 to 10 times EBITDA, well, yada, 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 12, whatever.
For big groups.
For big groups, like you have 5 to 10 locations, you can sell your business for that amount. And that's high compared to other industries, right? And so the thing that I don't think people talk about is that those multiples might not always be there. So there's a lot of groups that have 5, 6 locations. And I could never sell because I could never work for somebody else. I could never, I love doing the thing. But what if the multiple is 3 in 4 years? And it's like, the market's high right now. So I think people are starting to take their chips off the table a little bit because it's just in the fervor, people aren't talking about that. Like multiples might not always be the time. In fact, one last thing.
I like this. I want you to keep expanding on that.
Yeah. So there's a really cool man. Okay, I always come on podcasts and make commitments for my team to create stuff and send them out to you. So I'm curious to do that. But we had a speaker in the fall summit, which was in Dallas, which was, should I buy, sell, or partner? And it was for dentists or groups who are interested in all about, should I just build my own group? Should I partner with a large group? Should I sell out? And one of the speakers, he's a Wall Street guy, and he worked in the medical industry. And now he works for MB2 Dental in Texas, which is, he does all the valuations. He's a numbers, kind of Wall Street numbers spreadsheet guy. And he came from medical, and he basically got on stage and said, you know, look, when I was in medical, and medical's consolidated. And when it's done, it's done. Like when the consolidation happens, it's done. It's a finite period of time to where it reaches a threshold, and that opportunity only lasts in that time. The cement kind of dries. And so that's what he said, that enough people don't really understand. Now we're probably far from that, only being 18 or 20% consolidated.
Maybe though, Jake,
that's what people call the runway.
What if the acceleration though, right, of this happens? So like your timeline could be contracted because of, you know, things have a tendency in the beginning stage, right? The adoption phase, things move slowly and that graph kind of moves along, right? But if you get this massive adoption, if it hockey sticks and all of a sudden what we thought was this 10-year or 5-year runway becomes a 3-year runway, your cement just hardened much faster.
Right.
And so these are the things, and this is not to be like, holy shit, and freak people out, but like play the what if scenario, like, you know, and just like you said, some people are thinking about this and they're pulling some chips off the table because ultimately this is our biggest asset. It's my biggest asset is my practice. Craig, it's surely your biggest asset, you know, our buildings and practice. And
then again, I mean, you also could just say, you know what, I'm in it for the next 10 to 15 years and let them, it's like owning a house, right? Like I'm going to weather the fluctuations.
Yep.
And just build a great business, and I'll deal with it 15 years from now. But those are questions, good questions to ask ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and do it for the right reasons. Not, you know, I think fear is a wrong motivator when it comes to something like that. If you're fearful of that, you know, like go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, like take that fear and become obsessed with just beating everyone's ass who's, you know, coming in your area, right? Like obsessed with creating a better experience, better dentistry, better branding, better, you know, and that will buy you more runway for sure. You know, if that's your fear-based thing. But, you know, yeah, that's cool. I never heard that analogy. The cement is going to dry and then there's no more, just like medicine. Like no one's making money on, you know, there's no this roll up. You don't hear about medical roll ups anymore because the cement's dry.
Derm is huge. I was speaking with a private equity guy that happened to be my patient yesterday and just talking about the numbers in derm. Holy smokes.
Yeah, derm and dentistry are equally yoked.
I meant to, that's something else another story I meant to tell you real quick is, so there's a guy that we knew that I knew that was in audiology, you know, business in that sector. And so he exited from that and he, in his business, he wanted to know what to go into next. And so we hired, this is probably a few years ago, you know, BCG or one of these big consulting groups like Bolton Consulting or something to do an analysis on like, okay, what industry do we go in next with our little thing that we have?
Oh, wow. So they were totally agnostic with like, here, let's just pick one. Let's just go with the best, lowest hanging fruit.
Exactly. And these big consultancies in New York and Boston, this is what they do, right? And they spend like 6 months or a year and they do all this crazy research and they'll tell you. And so they did 25 verticals, all the ones that you mentioned, Craig, you know, derm, vet, all of the kind of practitioner-y style businesses. And where do you think they entered? They entered dentistry. They came as number one out of the 25.
No way.
Yeah. And this is 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, but something that's still relevant. But that just told me like, wow, it is. Wow. I mean, you got the Wall Street folks. I just picture they're in their suits and they're just looking at numbers and spreadsheets and they're at lunch, you know, and they're like, hey, check out.
Let's go clobber dentistry.
Yeah. Like it's the returns are insane, you know, or whatever. And so that just tells you why this is kind of happening and really the opportunity that is available for people.
But it feeds itself though too. So when Wall Street has its attention, it shapes dentistry. So people are shaping to do what Wall Street wants, and it should be driven by dentistry versus by Wall Street, because Wall Street may not be as aware of what's coming. And Pete and I have really good ideas about what we think is coming, because let's face it, we could all benefit from the infrastructure of a DSO, whether that's procurement services and all this other stuff. But right now, for the most part, masterminds, best practices, technology, you know, there's just so many different things that a true DSO can offer. but the current DSO landscape is a little bit one size fits all. And if you have a Chick-fil-A, they're going to want you to behave like a Morton's, or if you have a Morton's, they're going to want you to behave like a Starbucks. It's a little bit too one size fits all.
I will tell you. So in the past, I would say 18 months, I feel and I'm not a dentist, so I don't have that same kind of come from that same spot. So I understand kind of what you're saying. I feel very optimistic about where a lot of the larger groups are coming from. They are learning it's dentistry driven because they've banged their head against the wall for the past 10 years and not had a lot of major meltdowns and fires with it being that way. Craig, as you described, kind of the Wall Street driven. And the narrative that I see out there now is total dentist driven. Like,
yeah, it's cool.
The only way it's going to go. And you'll hear a ton of that at our event in June in Phoenix. But yeah, I think the lessons have been learned there. I think maybe dentistry more so than other verticals and industries. It just seems particularly sensitive on the associate dentist side. Like, they gotta be the ones that drive the car. Is my takeaway.
Yeah.
Yep. It's so true. It's so true. I think that you could get away with a lot more. I say get away with it, but making it a little bit more unilateral towards the Wall Street and DSO side and neglect the dentist. In the past, I think that there has to be a better way that allows the dentist to helps everybody at the same time.
That is, I will just tell you, like in the smaller groups and at these events where the larger groups hang out, that is all the talk is how do we empower our dentists? How do we get them? That's why. So one of the presentations or one of the panels we're having is called it's about associate ownership, and is the employee dentist model dead? Is what we're going to talk about, because what the larger groups are realizing is a lot of dentists need to be part owners in the businesses and to give them a real estate, and that leads to better business, better dentistry, better patient care. So that even is trending out the door, is employee kind of
That's cool.
Dentists. So anyway, I feel optimistic. I know that probably doesn't make anyone feel better, me not being a dentist, but I feel very good about the narrative that's developing amongst the bigger groups.
Yeah, that's refreshing for you to say that. That's cool.
It is cool. That is cool. I'm looking at your landing page for your event in June, and Richard Evangelista is going to be there. We actually had him on the podcast recently, and that was largely downloaded because of I think the title just kind of blew people away, like 44 locations by himself. No PE, no. Like, what? I remember when I heard that and I was like, I gotta go meet this guy. So anyway, I'm kind of looking at that. It's pretty cool. You got a cool lineup for sure. And I'm excited to be there. Craig, I know this will be your first exposure to the group, but be cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about it as well.
Well, other than exposure to Jake, of course. So
yeah, no, it's Jake. I mean, so another Margaret McGuckin, who is the former CEO of Clear Choice, and she actually handled most of their HR as well. I believe she is. There's so many people undercover that are just incredible, and so she's going to talk about. She's one of those, and I mean, people come away from conversation with her with white face, like, I will never be the same after that. I mean, really, it's crazy. So she'll be talking about top line revenue growth, teledentistry. And one last really cool thing is, so Pacific Dental Services is working on, they're trying to change the way that payments happen. And I think we talked about this a little bit, Pete, but dental payments and the way that they're coming out with a product that I think everyone needs to know about how to make it much easier, less friction. And then dental medical integration, which we talked about, hot topic, but Dr.
They're coming out with their own method of payments. Let's go back to
that. Potentially. I mean, we have to come and check it out. They're going to kind of.
They're coming out with their own cryptocurrency. Pacific.
No,
is
that what we're taking away here?
Put it this way, ways to reduce the friction. If you think about the way, and so there's another. I mean, I could go on, but the way payments go with dental is not. It's not ideal, right? Like chasing down. It's hard for patients. There's a lot of friction involved.
Yeah.
If you were to map it out now, you probably map it out differently. And they're tackling that, and
that's their fintech thing they're talking about.
Potentially, yeah. And then Dr. Biramian, who has a group in Arizona, she is integrated with medical, so she has integrated practice. They're working on a few practices. It's happening, and so she's got an incredible story. She talk about how they're doing it, what they're doing. medical and dental in one location, which I think Dr. Boulden, you talked about.
Yeah, I did that way back in the day, probably before its time. And I was telling you before we hit record that I loved it. It was just early, and I think it was I didn't think we executed very well on the proposition because it was literally like a first adopter into that thing. But really the whole genesis of it was coming from, I went through Bail Doneen certification, which is a cardiology certification thing that's kind of geared towards some dentist, and the oral systemic connection, oral systemic connection. So I went really deep down that rabbit hole, and I said, a lot of this data that we get, it really needs to have a physician to implement some. And there's a synergy of solving problems with the correlation between, mouth inflammation and, let's say, for example, diabetes and HbA1c levels. Like, there's huge corollaries that happen. And without having someone directly on your team, it's really hard to kind of quarterback with some local physicians. They're just very resistant to dentists, having those conversations, unfortunately.
So I think it took them 2 years to figure out how to have those conversations, and they have them now, and it's so far it's working.
I have a hygienist actually who spends more time talking to doctors than physicians than I've ever seen, that more so than any of my doctors, like tenfold, because she's on the front lines of getting the DNA health reports, or the oral DNA, like just Velscope, all sorts of stuff. So she's constantly talking to these physicians about that, and she's had better results. But I'm glad to hear that Dr. Bayramian,
yep.
Is that her name? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to see that that's happening, because I did not implement it successfully. So I'm glad that it's happening, because it's going to better healthcare in general. And I'm a big 100%. Fan of just longevity and wellness. So it's cool.
So we'll we'll invite anyone from around. I think last year we did a coupon code Bulletproof, which we can get you this year.
Oh, we did? Did we get some money off of it?
Yeah, I think $100 or so.
Nice.
It was Bulletproof folks there. So
all right, so we're gonna make another code Bulletproof?
Yeah, we'll make a code Bulletproof.
Cool.
And yeah, would love to see it. If you're, there are folks that have one location there for sure. If you're thinking about that second location or have multiple locations, the number one feedback we get is just the energy and vibe. When you put a bunch of people who are basically excited about the future. That's what it is. It's rather
excited about the future of dentistry, regardless of where you are.
Rather than
I love it. I love it. There
the
needs to be
status
more of
quo
that.
and trying to keep things the same. It's like, okay, how can we evolve and make things better?
I love it. Well, we'll be there, won't we, buddy?
All right.
Yes, sir.
Hey, great conversation. Love it,
Jake,
guys.
thanks for being a part tour.
All right. It's an honor. I think it's an honor to be asked that.
It's a select and chosen few.
Yeah, Jake, that was a lot of value for our listeners, and for me personally. I appreciate your time and perspective. It's very cool. I'm excited to be there.
Appreciate it. Can't wait to see you guys. Yeah, we'll have some fun.
All right, pal. Until next time, until we see you in person, thanks for listening in to another edition of the Bulletproof Dental Practice Podcast. Over and out.
See you guys.